This is Death by Reality Check, a hilarious feel-good cozy mystery, Island Whodunit Book 31, written by Tess Marlowe and narrated by Sarah.
Hi, Tess Marlowe here. Before Chapter 1 begins, please take 1 second to look at your screen and hit subscribe. It helps me bring you more free cozy mysteries.
Chapter 1. You are completely out of your mind if you think Matteo is actually going to choose Isabella. Shannon pointed her beer bottle at Gary like a loaded weapon. Matteo is a true romantic. Gary slapped his hands on the wicker table, rattling the coasters. Did you see the way he looked at her during the jet ski date? The man was practically weeping. He wasn't weeping, Gary. He was wincing, Reg said from the corner of the porch, leaning back in his chair. The man is a retired soccer player with 2 blown ACLs. You put him on a rented Yamaha hitting a 3-foot coastal chop, and of course there are tears. Thank you. Shannon threw her hands up. It was physical agony, not true love. How many times do I have to tell you? Rafa gestured toward the night sky in frustration. It's not soccer, it's football. I'm telling you, the connection is real, Gary insisted, stubbornly crossing his arms and completely ignoring Rafa. They had a moment on the beach, a real, vulnerable moment. Matteo is an idiot, Reg said, taking a slow sip of his drink. He compromised his advantage the minute he gave Isabella the immunity rose on day 2. He surrendered all his leverage. Now she doesn't need him to survive the elimination round. It's basic strategy. You never give up the high ground for a woman who spent 30 years playing cartel widows on television. Shannon paused and stared at him. It's not a military campaign, Reg. It's a dating show. Strategy is strategy, Reg muttered. Lucien groaned from the porch swing, dragging a hand down his face. I don't understand how any of you are taking this seriously. It's completely fake. You know they splice the reaction shots, right? When Isabella was staring longingly at him by the fire pit, her eyeline was completely off. She wasn't looking at Matteo. She was looking at a boom mic. Let them have fun, Lucien, Alex said from her spot next to Reg, a serene smile on her face. Fake love, Polly screeched from Gary's shoulder. Fake love. Bombay lifted his massive head from the floorboards, let out a deep, rumbling sigh at the bird's outburst, and went back to sleep. The sound of boots crunching on the gravel path interrupted the debate. Detective Angela Mendoza walked up the steps, dropped her keys onto the wicker table with a heavy clatter, and sighed. I step out of the precinct for 10 minutes to get lunch, she said. 10 minutes. And when I return, Tito is hyperventilating in the break room because he saw someone named Isabella crying near the churro stand, and dispatch is getting calls about camera drones buzzing over the North Shore. What the hell is going on? And why does my island suddenly feel like a soundstage? It's the second act, Gary beamed, leaning forward. They're filming the pilot season right here in San Malvino. Mendoza stared at him blankly. What in God's name is the second act? Only the biggest reality dating show in Latin America, Shannon said, excitedly pulling up a colorful graphic on her phone. It's exclusively for singles over 50. They bring in retired celebrities, actors, athletes, TV personalities, and put them in a luxury tropical villa to find true love. It's amazing. More like annoying, Reg rolled his eyes. It's an editing nightmare, Lucien grumbled. Mendoza pinched the bridge of her nose. You're telling me that there's a massive, highly insured production on my island, complete with aging celebrities and camera crews, and nobody bothered to inform the law enforcement? It's some big TV network from Brazil, Rafa said. I bet they have their own private security. They're running a completely closed set, Shannon said, swiping through her screen. And they are fast. It's a live-to-tape format. They film all day, edit like maniacs, and broadcast it the very next night to keep the audience hooked in real time. It's brilliant. The whole island is watching. I'm not watching. Mendoza rolled her eyes. She pulled out an empty chair and collapsed into it. And where exactly is this luxury tropical villa they're supposedly filming in? Nobody knows, Gary said, grabbing a beer. They're moving like a ghost protocol unit. All the establishing shots in the opening credits show the San Malvino cliffs and the lighthouse, but the actual house is completely hidden. I tried pinging the broadcast servers to trace their local IP, Lucien said, shrugging. I tried tracking their digital footprint, but they're using a localized closed network and bouncing their daily upload straight to a private satellite. It's completely off the grid, annoying but decent. They have to be somewhere secluded, Alex noted, pouring Mendoza a glass of wine. You can't control a narrative if tourists are walking through the background of your shots. Someone saw Alejandro at the marina this morning, Shannon offered. Alejandro? Mendoza asked. Alejandro Vega, 2 Michelin stars, fiery temper. Looks amazing in an apron, Shannon said without missing a beat. He was arguing with a producer near the fuel docks because he refused to eat the craft services breakfast, and Julian over at the Golden Fig locked down his entire patio for a private event 3 times in the past 2 weeks. He wouldn't say a word, but I saw a grip truck parked in the alley. Julian is tight-lipped because they probably paid him triple his daily revenue to keep his mouth shut, Rafa said, swirling a dark rum over ice. I don't get how a refined guy like Julian would partner with trash TV, Mendoza said. It's not his style. Bad publicity is still publicity, Angie, Rafa said, and with the number of new restaurants opening every day, Julian has to keep up. It's actually a fascinating social experiment, Alex said, resting her chin on her hand. If you strip away the bright colors and the romantic music, it's a brilliant study in group dynamics. You take highly ambitious, historically wealthy people who are used to being in complete control of their environments. You strip them of their cell phones, isolate them from their support networks, deprive them of sleep, and feed them a steady stream of alcohol. It completely bypasses their prefrontal cortex. Reg nodded. A high-end version of destabilization techniques. Exactly, Alex smiled at him. They revert to pure instinct and emotional volatility. The producers don't even have to write a script. They just create the pressure cooker and wait for the explosion. Rafa took a slow sip of his rum. Or, hear me out, it is an incredibly efficient way to launder money. Mendoza paused, her glass halfway to her mouth. Don't do this, Raphael. Hear me out, Rafa said, setting his glass down. They have a massive, rotating crew of independent contractors. They are renting private villas and boats, probably entirely in cash. Inflate the catering budgets, the wardrobe budgets, the location fees, and voila, looks like you spent $10 million on production, but you only spent $4 million. The remaining $6 million gets cleaned through international shell companies under the guise of television distribution rights. It is beautiful. The Cartel de Sinaloa used to do the exact same thing with direct-to-DVD action movies in the 90s. I respect the hustle. You see a cartel operation in everything, Lucien said. I see lots of gray accounting, Rafa corrected. And bad acting. It's not bad acting, Gary pointed his beer in Rafa's direction. Elena is a serious journalist. She's only there to document the modern dating landscape for a book she's writing. She said so in her confessional. Elena is a shark, Shannon corrected. She threw Isabella under the bus during the cocktail party just to secure a rose. She's playing the long game. I cannot believe my inner circle has been compromised by bad TV, Mendoza said, looking deeply betrayed. It's not bad TV, Angela, it's a lifestyle, Shannon said. Before Mendoza could reply, a loud, obnoxious air horn sound erupted from Shannon's phone. Shannon gasped, snatching the device off the table. 5-minute warning, episode 10 is going live. The porch immediately sprang into motion. Gary finished his beer in one big gulp and scrambled out of his chair. Lucien sighed, stretching his back as he stood up, clearly feigning reluctance. Are we doing popcorn? Gary asked, wiping his mouth. Because I brought my own flavor dust. White cheddar and jalapeno. If you get that dust on my couch, you're sitting on the floor, Alex warned. Bombay finally registered the movement, realizing that humans standing up often correlated with snacks, and trotted happily toward the screen door. TV time! Polly shrieked, flapping his wings. Come on, Rafa, Alex said, pausing at the door and smiling. Let's go watch your money launderers fall in love. Chapter 2. All right. Point of order. Mendoza leaned forward on the living room sofa, pointing a finger coated in white cheddar and jalapeno dust directly at the 85-inch television screen. Who is the man in the ridiculous silk shirt, and why is he aggressively stirring a martini at the woman who looks like she wants to stab him? That's Lorenzo Costa. They call him Enzo. He's a famous music producer from Buenos Aires, Shannon said, quickly pulling up the Wikipedia page and showing it to Mendoza. He is the clear villain of the season, Gary added, shoving another handful of popcorn into his mouth. He was sitting cross-legged on the rug, guarding the bowl. Bombay lay entirely flat on his side next to Gary, his massive black tail thumping rhythmically every time a piece of jalapeno popcorn missed Gary's mouth and hit the carpet. He isn't a villain, he's a provocateur, Alex corrected from the armchair, watching the screen with the focused intensity of a psychiatrist observing a lab rat. He has narcissistic traits, certainly, but notice how he positions himself in the center of the room. He thrives on destabilizing the others to maintain control. It's a classic defense mechanism. It's a classic way to get punched in the mouth, Reg grunted. He was standing by the kitchen island, arms crossed, refusing to sit down, though he hadn't taken his eyes off the screen in 20 minutes. Mendoza wiped her fingers on a napkin and stared at the screen. The production value of the second act was admittedly staggering. The camera swooped over a flawlessly lit, infinity-edge pool perched somewhere on the San Malvino cliffs, before cutting back to the aggressively tense cocktail party. "Okay, so Lorenzo is the bad guy," Mendoza said, squinting. "Who is the woman he's annoying?" "Lucia," Shannon said without looking up from her phone. "Fashion designer, old money. She's only here to promote a new line of resort wear. She's been completely bored since day one." "And the one crying by the fire pit?" "That's Mateo," Gary said defensively. "Retired footballer, total romantic." "He's a disaster," Reg muttered. "Next to him is Isabella," Shannon continued, pointing at a striking woman glaring into the fire. "Telenovela royalty. She's been playing cartel widows for 30 years. To her left is the chef I told you about. Throws things when he's angry." "Literally every chef I know does that," Reg said. "Okay, maybe except Santiago. I've actually never seen the kid get angry." "That's because he was raised by his grandmas," Alex said with a smile. "Wait, who is the guy holding a soundbite session in the corner?" Mendoza asked, genuinely invested now, though she would absolutely deny it if pressed. "Hector," Rafa answered, taking a sip of his rum. "Disgraced former politician from Bogota. Embezzlement scandal in 2018. He is trying to rebrand himself as a misunderstood family man." "And the woman waving the rock over Hector's head?" Mendoza asked, her eye twitching slightly. "That's not a rock. It's a rose quartz," Gary said earnestly. "That's Carmen. She was a huge pop star in the 80s. She brings her own healing crystals everywhere to ward off negative energy. She started a rumor yesterday that Alejandro was secretly bankrupt just to see what would happen," Shannon said proudly. "She's an agent of chaos, wrapped in a bohemian shawl." "Then there's Elena," Alex said, pointing to a sharp-featured woman standing by the bar, quietly observing the room. "Former hard news anchor. She claims she's here purely as a sociological researcher, but if you watch her micro-expressions, she's highly competitive. She's manipulating Hector right now without him even realizing it." "A politician, an actress, a chef, a journalist, a pop star, a designer, an athlete, and a music producer," Rafa mused, taking a slow sip of his rum. "Put them in a house with unlimited tequila, and you do not need a script. You need a referee." "Or a hostage negotiator," Reg said. On screen, the dramatic orchestral music swelled. The camera cut to Lorenzo staring menacingly at Alejandro across the pool. The screen suddenly went black for a split second, cutting sharply to an extreme-wide shot of the villa's courtyard. From the corner of the sofa, Lucien let out a sharp, offended groan. "What?" Shannon asked, looking over at him. "Look at it. Just look at it. Amateurs." Lucien groaned, rubbing his eyes. "I am looking at it," Gary said. "Carmen is trying to cleanse the fire pit." "Not the people, Gary. Look at the shot." Lucien pointed a shaking finger at the television. It doesn't match the previous camera angle at all. It's live to tape, Lucien, Shannon said dismissively. They edit these things in like 4 hours. Cut them some slack. I don't care if they edited it in an hour. It's sloppy, Lucien complained, leaning forward. And listen to the audio track. The ambient background noise, the crickets and the waves, it's looping every 4 seconds. You can hear the exact same audio artifact repeating. And look at the lighting on Isabella's face. It's totally mismatched. Someone is working under extreme pressure, Rafa said, smiling faintly. Lucien shook his head. This isn't just rushed. This was rendered in an absolute panic. They're splicing different timelines together. This isn't a continuous scene. Shannon frowned, her reality TV expert instincts suddenly kicking in. She scrambled up onto her knees, staring intensely at the screen. Wait, Shannon said, her voice dropping. What? Gary asked. Where is Lorenzo? The living room went quiet. On screen, the cocktail party continued. The camera panned over the remaining 7 contestants holding crystal champagne flutes. He was right there, Gary said, pointing to an empty leather chair by the bar. He was just arguing with Alejandro. He's completely gone, Shannon said, her eyes darting across the screen. And the editing is entirely focused on avoiding the left side of the patio. Maybe he got fed up and walked off the show? Gary suggested. It happens all the time. The pressure gets to them and they just bounce. He didn't walk off, Reg said instantly. How do you know? Mendoza asked, turning to look at him. Reg pointed at the television. The bar top, lower left quadrant. The camera swept past the outdoor bar for a fraction of a second. Resting on the marble counter was a heavy crystal tumbler, half full of amber liquid. That's Lorenzo's scotch, Reg said, his voice dropping into its familiar deadpan register. He was holding it in the previous shot. You don't abandon a high-end 20-year single malt on a bar top to make a dramatic exit. You take it with you, or you finish it. The only reason a man leaves a full glass behind is if he's under fire or forcibly removed. Oh, come on, Mendoza said, giving Reg an unconvinced look. A guy like him probably has a few crates of that scotch delivered. Before she could continue, her phone rang. She pulled it out of her pocket and put on speaker. What's up, Tito? Boss? Tito's voice crackled through the speaker. He was whispering and sounded breathless, like he was hiding in a supply closet. Are you watching the show? Mendoza's eyes locked onto the television screen, where Carmen was nervously adjusting her crystal necklace. I might be. Why? There's a guy here, Tito whispered frantically. In the station lobby. He looks like he's about to throw up. What does he want? He says he's a camera assistant for the production, Tito said. He says he needs a detective right now. There's a dead body on the set. They found him hours ago. The living room went dead silent. Even Bombay stopped thumping his tail. Mendoza didn't blink. Who is the victim, Tito? He's not telling me. Tito swallowed hard over the line. Just keeps repeating that he needs a detective. Mendoza hung up without saying another word. She stood up and grabbed her keys from the coffee table. Lucien, get up. Grab your laptop, let's go. And I foolishly hoped for a quiet Friday night. Lucien sighed. Give me 5 minutes. This, Mendoza said, opening the screen door, is exactly why I can't watch any scheduled programming. Chapter 3. Mendoza pushed through the heavy doors of the San Malvino Police Station, the humid night air following her into the air-conditioned lobby. Lucien trailed a few steps behind her, clutching his laptop bag against his chest. A young man was sitting in one of the plastic lobby chairs, bouncing his knee rapidly. He was in his mid-20s, wearing a black polo shirt, a utility belt covered in gaffer tape, and a headset resting around his neck. He looked terrified. Mendoza stopped a few feet away and held up her badge. I'm Detective Mendoza, she said, her voice steady and professional. Officer Tito said you needed to speak with me. Are you all right? The young man jumped to his feet, swallowing hard. I'm Mike. I'm a camera assist on the B unit. I'm okay, but I had to sneak off the lot. Take a breath, Mike, Mendoza said calmly. You're safe here. Tell me exactly what's going on." Mike gripped the edge of his headset. "It's Lorenzo Costa. They found him by the stone gazebo on the north edge of the property this morning. He was dead. It looked like he hit his head." Mendoza frowned, exchanging a quick glance with Lucien. "This morning? Mike, it's past 9 at night. Why wasn't the police called immediately?" "Renata," Mike whispered, looking toward the glass doors as if expecting someone to storm through them. "Our showrunner. She completely panicked. If word got out that a contestant died, the network would pull the show and the stock prices would tank. She confiscated everyone's phones. She locked the cast in their rooms and told them it was a surprise isolation challenge. Then she made the editing team spend the last 12 hours scrubbing Enzo from yesterday's footage so we could broadcast tonight's episode like nothing happened, and Lorenzo just walked off the show." Lucien stared at him, genuinely horrified. "She was busy with editing while there was a dead body on the property?" "Where is the body now, Mike?" Mendoza asked, keeping her voice completely level despite the rising anger in her chest. Mike wrung his hands. Renata didn't want the cast seeing anything, so she had the security move him. He's on ice, literally. They put him in the walk-in freezer." Mendoza closed her eyes for a brief second. "I hitchhiked here right after the broadcast started," Mike rushed out, his voice cracking. "I'm definitely fired, and Renata is going to destroy my career, but I couldn't just sit there. Enzo was an arrogant jerk, but it's not fair. No one deserves to be left next to the frozen empanadas." "You did the right thing," Mendoza assured him firmly. She turned toward the bullpen. "Tito, grab your guys. Mike, you're going to ride with us and show us exactly where this estate is." "Lovely. Another sleepless night at a crime scene," Lucien murmured, though he was already following her out the door. 20 minutes later, a convoy of 3 San Malvino police cruisers, their light bars flashing silently, pulled up to the towering wrought iron gates of the Castillo estate. A burly private security guard stepped out of the guardhouse, holding up a hand. Mendoza stepped out of her cruiser and walked up to the iron bars. "Detective Mendoza, San Malvino Police," she said. "Open the gate." "Private property, ma'am?" the guard said, puffing out his chest slightly. "Closed set. Nobody gets in without clearance from the showrunner." Before Mendoza could reply, a woman came marching down the paved driveway. She was in her late 40s, wearing a flawlessly tailored linen suit, holding an iPad, and radiating pure corporate entitlement. "I am Renata Oliveira, executive producer of this program," she announced, her voice echoing sharply in the night air. "Detective, whatever your informant told you is a gross exaggeration of an internal personnel matter. This is a closed set operating under a Brazilian production charter. You do not have the authority to disrupt a multi-million-dollar broadcast." Mendoza looked at the woman through the bars. "A television production is not a foreign embassy, Ms. Oliveira," she said calmly. "You are on San Malvino soil, and you are currently withholding a crime scene. I am not going to argue with you. If you do not open this gate right now, I will officially declare this entire estate an active homicide scene. I will revoke your filming permits and will impound every camera, hard drive, and server on this property as evidence, and personally arrest you for obstruction of justice." Renata glared at her, her grip tightening on her iPad. "Open the gate," Mendoza repeated, her tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation, "or I will shut down your show permanently." Renata looked at the 3 police cruisers, then at Mendoza's unblinking stare, then gave a sharp nod to the guard. The heavy gates slowly swung open. The estate was a sprawling modern mansion surrounded by lush gardens, but it was currently an absolute war zone of thick black cables, massive lighting rigs, and crew members standing around in nervous silence. Mendoza stopped in the middle of the driveway and turned to Mike. "Take Lucien to the editing bay," Mendoza instructed. "Show him exactly which servers are holding the raw footage from last night." She looked at Lucien. "Lock them out of their own system. Secure the data. If anyone tries to interfere, arrest them." "Got it, boss." Lucien nodded. "Secure everything. Be very unpleasant." Mike quickly led Lucien toward a cluster of production trailers parked on the lawn. Mendoza turned her attention back to Renata. Take me to the body, now." Renata didn't say a word. She turned on her heel and led Mendoza toward the villa. The walk-in freezer was the size of a small apartment. Stacked on the metal wire shelves were industrial boxes of vegetables, fruit, and vacuum-sealed steaks. Sitting slumped against the back wall, nestled between two massive boxes of frozen shrimp, was Lorenzo Costa. He was still wearing the expensive, brightly colored silk shirt they had seen on the television screen an hour ago, though it was now stiff with frost. His head was tilted sideways. A horrific, jagged contusion marked his left temple. Mendoza stared at the body. "We can't have accidents," Renata said from the doorway, her voice tight but defensive. "We have to maintain the timeline. We were going to call you in the morning." Mendoza didn't look at her. She slowly pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed. It rang 3 times before a gruff, deeply irritated voice answered. "Do you know what time it is, Angela?" Dr. Elliot Crane rasped. "I was just about to open a bottle of Bordeaux." "Put the cork back in, Elliot," Mendoza said, her breath pluming in the freezing air. "I'm sending you coordinates. The Castillo estate on the West Ridge. We have a body that has been sitting in a walk-in freezer for over 12 hours. There was a heavy, frustrated sigh on the other end of the line. "Who keeps putting bodies in freezers? It completely ruins my core temperature readings. What's this Castillo estate?" "It's the set of the second act," Mendoza said. There was a brief pause on the line. "Oh, come on," Elliot groaned. "I love that show. Chapter 4. 20 minutes later, the coroner's white van parked on the paved driveway of the Castillo estate, closely followed by Reggie's old Jeep. Dr. Elliot Crane unfolded himself from the driver's seat. Reg, Alex, Shannon, Gary, and Bombay stepped out onto the gravel, taking in the massive lighting rigs and panicked production assistants with undisguised fascination. "I explicitly asked for the coroner," Mendoza said, crossing her arms. "Not a parade. What are you all doing here?" "You can't blame me for the parade," Elliot grumbled, pushing his glasses up his nose. "I just let them know Enzo is dead in the group chat." Mendoza stared at him. "What group chat?" "The second act spoilers chat," Shannon said, holding up her phone. "Elliot dropped a pin right after he talked to you." "Elliot, you are a respected medical professional, a civil servant," Mendoza said, glaring at the coroner. "Why in God's name are you gossiping in a reality TV group chat?" "Because it's highly entertaining," Elliot shot back, completely unfazed. "And if Reg can be in the group chat, I can be too." Mendoza slowly turned her head to look at the massive, bearded former Navy SEAL. Reg shoved his hands in his pockets, looking entirely comfortable in the balmy night air. He shrugged. "Gary added me. I didn't want to be rude and leave it." "He sends voice notes," Gary offered helpfully, still holding a half-empty bowl of popcorn. "Mostly about Mateo's fake abs and fake tan, but still." "It's his excuse to eat buckets of popcorn every night," Alex said, patting Reg on his arm. "You know how food-motivated my husband is." Mendoza rolled her eyes at them. "Fine, just don't ask anyone for autographs and act respectable. Go stand by the catering truck." "That's all we could ask for, right, buddy?" Reg said, looking down at Bombay, who wuffed in agreement and pranced toward the truck, dragging Reg after him. Gary looked crestfallen. "Can I at least look for Carmen? I want to see if her crystals glow in real life." "Go!" Mendoza pointed toward the truck and turned back to Elliot. "Get your bag. Your patient awaits." Mendoza pulled open the heavy steel door of the walk-in freezer. A cloud of white vapor rolled out into the tropical air. Elliot stepped inside, his breath instantly turning to mist. He looked at the boxes of frozen shrimp, then down at the body of Lorenzo Costa, perfectly preserved in a layer of frost. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Elliot groaned, looking at Enzo's blue body. He dropped his medical bag onto the metal floor, grating with a heavy thud. "He's been here for almost a day." "The showrunner didn't want the cast to find out while they re-edited the episode," Mendoza said. "Why does everyone assume the freezer is the only option?" Elliot muttered, squatting down next to Lorenzo. "You killed someone in a villa? Marvelous. Choose a cold cellar or a pantry room." "Blame the TV," Mendoza said deadpan. Yeah, the source of all evil, Elliot said, putting on gloves. Who do you think did it? My money is on Alejandro. The man threw a heavy copper saucepan at the wall in episode 2 because Enzo said his scallops were overcooked. He clearly has anger management issues. Mendoza raised an eyebrow. We are standing over a murdered producer in a meat locker, Elliot. Not the weirdest place two of us have theorized, Elliot said, gently tilting Lorenzo's stiff head to the side. Though Isabella also has motive. Enzo basically humiliated her during the immunity ceremony. Can we focus on the physical evidence, please? Mendoza sighed. Mike, the camera assistant, said they found him by the stone gazebo on the north edge of the property this morning. Well, Mike is wrong, Elliot said. How do you know? Look at his feet. Elliot pointed his penlight at Lorenzo's expensive leather loafers. Mendoza stepped closer, squinting in the dim light. The soles and edges of the dark leather shoes were coated in a thick layer of fine, pale grit, completely frozen to the material. Sand, Mendoza said. Exactly. Elliot nodded. I bet there's no beach sand around the garden gazebo. Mendoza crossed her arms, the gears already turning in her head. So the killer, or the production crew, moved him. He died on the beach. They dragged him up to the gazebo to stage it, and then Renata shoved him in the freezer to buy time. They also took a souvenir, Elliot said. He leaned forward, carefully unbuttoning the top 3 buttons of Lorenzo's stiff, brightly colored silk shirt. He pulled the fabric back slightly, revealing the victim's bare, frozen chest and lower neck. He reached around to Lorenzo's lower back, feeling along the waistband of the slacks. Nothing, Elliot announced, pulling his hand back. Nothing what? These contestants wear wireless microphone packs 24 hours a day, Elliot explained, sounding entirely too knowledgeable about the production process. They are usually taped to the small of the back or clipped to the belt, with a wire running up the inside of the shirt. Enzo doesn't have one. Mendoza frowned. Maybe he took it off to go to sleep. He's wearing loafers and a silk shirt, Angela. He wasn't dressed for bed. Elliot pointed to a faint, sticky square of residue on the skin just above Lorenzo's belt line. Medical tape residue. The mic pack was there. Someone took it off. They didn't just move the body, Mendoza realized, her eyes narrowing. They removed the audio evidence too. Which means the killer is either someone in production who knows how the tech works, or another contestant who knew the microphone would record the whole thing, Elliot said, sitting back on his heels. What about the cause of death? Mendoza gestured to the ugly, jagged purple contusion on Lorenzo's left temple. Blunt force trauma? Elliot leaned in, hovering his penlight inches from the wound. I don't think so, Elliot said slowly. You don't think someone hit him? Oh, someone definitely hit him, Elliot corrected. Or he fell and struck his head on a rock down by the beach. But looking at the margins of the contusion, it doesn't look deep enough. The skull isn't depressed. It's a nasty knock, certainly enough to knock him unconscious. But it shouldn't have been instantly fatal to a healthy grown man. So what killed him? I have no idea, Elliot said, clicking his penlight off and standing up. He shoved his hands into his pockets, shivering slightly in the freezing air. Could be poison, could be asphyxiation, could be allergies, but I won't know for sure until I open him up and run a full toxicology panel. How fast can you get me an initial autopsy report? Elliot let out a dry, humorless laugh. He gestured broadly to the frozen producer sitting between the boxes of shrimp. Angela, he is literally a human popsicle, Elliot said. I have to let him thaw out at room temperature before I do anything. Mendoza grimaced. How long? Don't expect a report until tomorrow afternoon at the absolute earliest, Elliot said, picking up his medical bag. In the meantime, you should probably go interrogate the chef. I'm telling you, Alejandro is highly suspicious. Mendoza gave him a withering look. Just bag the body, Elliot. Chapter 5. Mendoza left the freezing temperature of the catering tent and walked across the damp grass toward a cluster of sleek black production trailers. The rhythmic thrumming of the estate's portable generators vibrated through the soles of her boots. She pulled open the door to the largest trailer and stepped into a blast of heavily air-conditioned chill. The inside of the editing bay was lined wall-to-wall with massive monitors, most of them currently displaying static or no-signal test patterns. Lucien was sitting in a rolling, ergonomic chair in the center of the room, spinning a USB drive between his fingers and glaring at the main console. Mike, the camera assistant, hovered nervously by the mini-fridge. "Tell me you have something," Mendoza said, leaning against the metal doorframe. "I have bad news and more bad news," Lucien said, dropping the USB drive onto the desk. "And a profound disrespect for whoever wired this server rack. Did you know they used standard plastic zip ties on the fiber optic cables? It's a war crime." "Lucien, the footage." Lucien spun his chair around to face her. "Right. Well, the raw footage of the last 24 hours has been scraped completely." Mendoza frowned. "Scraped? Not deleted?" "Completely scraped," Lucien confirmed, leaning forward. "Someone didn't just drag the files to the trash bin. They ran an overwriting protocol. It scrambles the raw data with random binary code so it can't be easily recovered. It's a scorched earth cover-up. Can you recover anything?" "I'll try," Lucien said, running a hand through his hair. "Sometimes the architecture leaves fragmented shadows on the secondary network switches, but it's going to take a lot of time, a steady supply of espresso, and absolute silence." Mendoza looked at Mike. "Did Renata order the server wipe?" "I don't know," Mike said, holding his hands up defensively. "Renata just told the daytime editors to cut Enzo out of the broadcast edit. I didn't see anyone run a wipe protocol. I don't even think Renata knows what that is." "Well, someone does," Lucien muttered, turning back to his keyboard. "There's something else," Mike said. "The cameras." Mendoza looked at him. "What about the cameras?" "All the cameras on the estate were turned off," Lucien said, bringing up a system log on his left monitor. He pointed to a long column of red timestamps. Every single feed, main house, pool, courtyard, and the beach. They all went dark at 6:15 this morning. They didn't come back online until noon. Mendoza crossed her arms. A 6-hour blind spot. "Someone manually killed the power to the primary router," Lucien said. "It wasn't a glitch. Someone walked in here and flipped the switch." "Keep digging," Mendoza said. "If someone comes in here, call the uniforms and post them in front of the door." "Can I call them if someone tries to talk to me in general?" Lucien asked. Mendoza didn't answer. She walked out of the trailer, letting the heavy door click shut behind her. The estate courtyard was eerily quiet. A few crew members were hastily rolling thick black cables into coils by the pool, keeping their heads down and avoiding eye contact with the police cruisers parked in the driveway. Mendoza walked straight through the double doors of the main villa. She grabbed a passing crew member by the hand. "Where is Renata?" "At her office. Take the corridor to your left." Renata Oliveira was sitting behind a large glass desk, tapping furiously on a laptop. Sitting next to her in a plush velvet chair was a man in an expensive, sharply tailored navy suit. He had a leather briefcase resting on his lap and was typing on his phone. "Excuse me," the man in the suit said, as soon as Mendoza opened the door. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with a practiced, authoritative motion. "This is a privileged conversation. You need to wait outside." Mendoza completely ignored him and walked in. "Detective Mendoza, San Malvino Police, and who would you be?" "I am the lead legal counsel for the network," the man said, clearing his throat and recovering his posture. "My name is Davis, and my client will not be answering any questions tonight." Mendoza didn't say a word. She just looked at him. "We are currently conducting an internal corporate review regarding a personnel issue," Davis continued, his voice adopting a smooth, practiced cadence. "Until formal charges are filed, we have no obligation to speak with local municipalities. Furthermore, this production operates under a Brazilian entertainment charter, which grants us certain privacy exemptions regarding unedited broadcast material." Mendoza waited for him to finish. "Are you done?" Mendoza asked. Davis blinked. "I am simply stating the legal boundaries of your jurisdiction." Mendoza looked past the lawyer, focusing entirely on the showrunner. Renata was watching her carefully. her hands resting flat on the glass desk. "Renata," Mendoza said, her voice perfectly calm and flat, "your lawyer seems to be under the impression that San Malvino is a lawless piece of rock in the Caribbean. It is not." Davis puffed his chest out. "Detective, international corporate law dictates—" "San Malvino has no extradition treaty with Brazil," Mendoza interrupted, her eyes never leaving Renata's face. Davis stopped talking. "Which means," Mendoza continued smoothly, "that I can charge you right now for tampering with a corpse, destruction of evidence, and obstruction of a homicide investigation. Put you in the back of my cruiser, drive you to Legoland, and let you rot there. Your government or your employer can't save you." Davis frowned. "Legoland?" "The San Malvino Correctional Facility," Mendoza said. "The locals call it Legoland because it's made entirely of gray cinder blocks. A lovely place. You will sit in a cell for 6 months before you even see a magistrate for a bail hearing." The room was completely silent. The hum of the air conditioner suddenly sounded very loud. Davis looked at Mendoza, then down at his expensive Italian leather shoes. He leaned over and whispered something rapidly into Renata's ear. Renata let out a sharp, exhausted sigh. She waved a hand, swatting the lawyer away. "Fine," Renata said, dropping her corporate posture. "Davis, sit down and stop talking." The lawyer sat back down, clutching his briefcase. "I wasn't even at the villa last night," Renata said, looking directly at Mendoza. "I didn't want anyone to know." Mendoza pulled out a small notepad from her back pocket and a pen. "Walk me through it." "I left the estate around midnight," Renata said, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "I needed a break from the noise, from the cast, from the cameras. I sneaked out the back gate so the security team wouldn't log my exit. I was gone all night." "When did you get back?" "This morning, a little before 6, Renata said. "The sun was just coming up. I walked in through the same back gate and cut across the north lawn toward the villa. That's when I saw Enzo." Mendoza clicked her pen. "Where exactly?" "Slumped over the stone table in the gazebo," Renata said. "He was just sitting there, his head down on his arms. From a distance, I thought he had too much to drink and passed out. His drinking really got out of hand lately." "But he wasn't asleep, I assume." "No," Renata said, her voice dropping a fraction. "I walked over to wake him up. I was going to yell at him to get back to his room before the morning crew started rolling cameras. But when I grabbed his shoulder, he was already cold. I saw the blood on the side of his head. He was dead." Mendoza wrote down the timeline. "So you thought moving him to the freezer was the best idea?" "I panicked," Renata said defensively. "If the network found out a contestant died on set, they would pull our broadcast charter immediately. Hundreds of people would lose their jobs. The stock prices would freefall. I just needed time." "Who helped you?" "Security guys. I told them they'll get a tax-free bonus if they keep their mouths shut," Renata nodded. "Then I invented the surprise isolation challenge to lock the rest of the cast in their bedrooms." Mendoza looked up from her notepad. "Did you wipe the servers?" Renata frowned, looking genuinely confused. "Wipe the servers?" "The raw footage from the last 12 hours was completely scraped using an overwriting protocol," Mendoza said. "No," Renata shook her head quickly. "I don't even know how to run a localized wipe protocol. I'm a producer, not a tech. I just told the editors to scrub Enzo from the broadcast cut manually, and I turned the cameras off." "At 6:15, Mendoza noted. "I walked into the editing bay and flipped the main power switch on the router," Renata admitted. "I didn't want any of the automated wide shots accidentally catching the security team moving the body from the gazebo. That's all I did." Mendoza stared at her. The timeline matched. "You said you left the estate at midnight," Mendoza said, slipping her notepad back into her pocket. "Where were you?" Renata hesitated. She looked down at her laptop keyboard, clearly uncomfortable. "I was off property," Renata said. "That's not an alibi," Mendoza said. "Where were you, and who can confirm it?" Renata crossed her arms, suddenly tight-lipped. She looked at her lawyer, then back to Mendoza. "I met someone on the island," Renata said quietly. Mendoza raised an eyebrow. That tends to happen on populated islands. And? We were on a date. Who is it? Mendoza asked. Renata shifted in her chair. She looked out the large glass window toward the dark ocean, avoiding the detective's gaze. Renata, Mendoza said, her tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Julian, Renata muttered. Julian Ferraro. Mendoza paused. Julian? Yes. The owner of the Golden Fig, Renata said, turning back to face Mendoza, her jaw tight. I met him a few weeks ago during our location scouting. We've been sneaking out to see each other. He picked me up down the road at midnight, and I stayed at his place until early this morning. Mendoza stared at her. The most pretentious restaurateur on San Malvino was secretly dating a reality television showrunner. He'll confirm it, Renata added defensively. I was with him the entire night. I couldn't have killed Enzo. Mendoza didn't smile, but it took a concerted effort. Don't leave this room, Mendoza said and walked out the door. Chapter 6. Don't look at me like that. You already had the prosciutto. Gary pointed a pair of metal catering tongs directly at Bombay. Bombay let out a high-pitched whine. He was sitting perfectly upright beside a massive folding table under the bright lights of the craft services tent, his eyes locked on a silver platter of carved roast beef with pure, unadulterated devotion. Give him the beef, Gary, Reg said, leaning against the side of the catering truck. And give me a piece, too. Mendoza walked into the light of the tent, looking utterly exhausted. She pulled out a metal folding chair and collapsed into it with a heavy sigh. Alex slid a cold bottle of sparkling water across the table. So what's up? Mendoza unscrewed the cap. Nothing definitive so far. Elliot says he can't determine a cause of death until tomorrow afternoon because the body is literally frozen solid. What about the digital footprint? Reggie asked, crossing his arms. Lucien usually has the server cracked by now. Lucien is currently threatening to bite people over the estate's cable management, Mendoza said, taking a long drink. The showrunner manually killed the power to the primary cameras for 6 hours this morning, and while the cameras were dark, someone ran a scorched earth wipe protocol on the servers. The entire 24-hour digital cache is gone. So, the killer knows exactly how an editing bay works, Alex said, leaning forward. Or they had someone in production do it for them. What about the showrunner? Shannon asked, abandoning her bowl of ceviche. She has access to everything. Did she kill him? She admits she found the body this morning and shoved him in the freezer to protect her broadcast charter, Mendoza said flatly, but she claims she wasn't even on the property last night. Did she have an alibi? Gary asked, constructing a sandwich that involved 3 different kinds of cheese and sliced mango. Mendoza set her water bottle down. She looked directly at Shannon. Julian, Mendoza said. Shannon froze. She slowly lowered her phone to the table. Julian? Our Julian? Golden Fig? Julian? Mendoza nodded. Apparently they've been secretly dating since the location scouts arrived on San Malvino last month. Shannon slapped both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute, unfiltered delight. Gary choked slightly on a piece of mango, pounding his fist against his chest. Even Reg stopped chewing. I knew it, Shannon gasped, pulling her hands away. I knew he wouldn't close his restaurant down for a private event just for anybody. It's not his style. Oh, this is the best thing that has ever happened. It's a smart alibi, Reg pointed out, looking at Mendoza. Julian has the ego to confirm he spent the night with a TV executive, but he has absolutely zero ability to help her cover up a homicide. It checks out, Mendoza agreed, rubbing her temples. She looked around the table, suddenly realizing the group was short one person. Wait, how come Rafa's not here? Getting his beauty sleep, Gary said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. He has a 5 a.m. job tomorrow, another cheating husband he has to follow on his morning run. Of course he does, Mendoza muttered. She leaned forward, resting her arms on the table. I have no murder weapon, no cause of death, no digital evidence, and a compromised crime scene. I need to squeeze the cast tonight while they are tired." "You're going to interview them right now?" Alex asked. "It's past midnight. They think they're in an isolation challenge. They don't know Lorenzo is dead yet," Mendoza said, standing up. "It's the best opportunity to get some truth out of them." "I'd suggest a group setting," Alex said softly. Mendoza frowned. "Standard procedure is to separate suspects so they can't coordinate their stories." "I know," Alex said, "but most of them are professional performers. Each one will give you perfect, manufactured grief. Put them all in one room, drop the bomb all at once, watch their faces." Mendoza nodded slowly. "Look for the baseline shock. See who flinches late." "Exactly. If someone already knows he's dead, they'll show it." "That's actually a neat idea. Thanks, Alex," Mendoza said, and turned to Shannon. "Can you do your social media magic? I need a deep dive on every single contestant. If you find anything relevant to the case, let me know." "Consider it done," Shannon said, her thumbs already flying across her screen. "Gary, bring the rest of those sandwiches. We are going down the internet rabbit hole." "Aye, Captain," Gary saluted. Mendoza looked at Alex and Reg. "Let's go ruin somebody's night." Mendoza found Officer Tito standing guard at the bottom of the floating glass staircase, looking nervously at the expensive modern art on the walls. "Tito," Mendoza said, "go upstairs. Unlock the bedrooms. Tell the cast the challenge is over and herd them all down to the fire pit room." "Yes, boss," Tito nodded, hurrying up the glass stairs. A few minutes later, the sound of complaining voices echoed down the hallway. The 7 remaining contestants of the second act filed into the room, and they looked terrible. Alejandro was wearing dark silk pajamas and glaring at everyone. Isabella had a silk sleep mask pushed up into her hair, looking deeply offended by the lack of dramatic lighting. Hector was aggressively smoothing his hair down. Mateo showed up in boxers and indeed didn't have a six-pack. "Where is Renata?" Hector demanded, stopping in the center of the sunken floor. "This is a clear violation of our contract. You cannot lock us in our rooms without access to the craft services table." "The catering is terrible anyway," Alejandro snapped. "Where are the camera operators?" Elena asked sharply, completely ignoring Alejandro. Her eyes darted toward the corners of the ceiling. "The red lights on the wall rigs are off." Mendoza stepped out from the shadows near the fire pit. "The cameras are indeed off," Mendoza said loudly, her voice cutting through the overlapping complaints. "And will stay that way. Renata is currently detained in her office." The cast stopped talking. 7 heads turned simultaneously. They stared at the woman standing by the fire pit with the gold shield resting on her belt. "Who are you?" Isabella asked, narrowing her eyes. "Are you the new challenge host?" "I am Detective Angela Mendoza, San Malvino Police," Mendoza said, clasping her hands loosely in front of her. "Police?" Alejandro scoffed, throwing a hand in the air. "What is this, a bit? Is this part of the show? Because I am not doing a murder mystery challenge at 1 a.m. "This isn't a show anymore," Mendoza said calmly. "Lorenzo Costa is dead." Chapter 7. The silence in the sunken living room lasted exactly 1 second before the room exploded. Isabella gasped loudly, said, "Ay, Dios mío," dramatically pressed the back of her hand to her forehead and collapsed backward. Mateo dove, catching her just before she hit the floor. "Medic! Get a medic! She is in shock!" Alex watched Isabella's right arm instinctively shoot out to brace against Mateo's knee, perfectly controlling the speed and angle of her fall. As the silk sleeve pushed up, Alex caught sight of a thick, angry red scratch running from the actress's wrist to her elbow. Alex caught Reggie's eye across the room. Reg gave a slow nod. Hector snapped his fingers repeatedly at Tito. "Give me my phone. Give me my phone right now." "I don't have your phone, sir," Tito stammered, backing up a step. "I need to call Bogota," Hector yelled, his voice cracking. "If my name is leaked in the same sentence as a homicide investigation, my rebranding campaign is dead. I am an honest man. I was polling at 4%. This ruins everything." Lucia dropped her hands to her hips and let out a long, exaggerated sigh. Wait, does this mean the whole estate is a crime scene? Because my swimwear photographer flies in from Rio at 7 a.m., and I am not shooting in front of yellow police tape. It completely clashes with the pastel palette of my new collection. Alejandro stepped forward, jabbing an angry finger toward Mendoza. This is a joke. Renata put you up to this, didn't she? Enzo was fine last night. This is just a cheap stunt to boost the ratings for the finale. I don't work for Renata, Mendoza said, completely unbothered by the chef's finger. Sit down and stop yelling. Carmen pulled a fist-sized chunk of black rock from her pocket. I knew it, she whispered loudly, waving the rock over Hector's head. The energy shifted at midnight. The aura in the house turned completely black. I felt the cold wind of the Reaper. Get that rock away from me, Hector swatted at her hand. He had a heart attack, Mateo yelled from the floor, still cradling Isabella. He drank too much and had bacon for breakfast every morning. It was his heart. He was murdered, Mendoza said clearly. The word dropped like a brick. The complaining abruptly stopped. Murdered? Elena asked, her voice completely calm. The journalist's eyes sharpened, quickly scanning the faces of the other contestants. How? I'm not answering questions, I'm asking them, Mendoza said, pulling her notepad from her back pocket. I need a timeline. When did each of you see him last? The room instantly descended into a shouting match. I went straight to my room after the cocktail party, Hector shouted over the others. 10:40. I was asleep, alone. You were pacing the hallway outside my door at midnight, Hector, Elena said, not even looking at him. Hector turned purple. I was getting my steps in. My Fitbit was behind for the day. I went to the kitchen at 11, Alejandro said loudly, glaring at Elena. The catering here is an insult to my profession. The craft services table had processed cheese. Processed. I spent an hour making a proper risotto to calm my nerves. Isabella suddenly sat up perfectly straight in Mateo's arms, the dramatic feint completely abandoned. You were furious. You threw a glass at his head. Alejandro glared at the actress. I threw it at the wall because he said my scallops tasted like rubber. I didn't kill him. You threatened him, Isabella yelled back, scrambling to her feet. You said you were going to gut him like a fish. It's a culinary expression. Mateo stood up, puffing his chest out and stepping between the chef and the actress. Do not yell at her. I will break your jaw, Alejandro. You are not in great shape, Mateo, Reg said from the back of the room. You aren't breaking anything. Sit down. Who else had issues with Lorenzo? Mendoza asked. Everyone fought with Lorenzo, Lucia said, rolling her eyes. He was a peasant with a black card. He spent the entire cocktail party trying to start rumors about my offshore accounts. But Isabella is the one who slapped him before the cameras started rolling. Isabella gasped, clutching her chest. Liar! I saw you, Lucia snapped. By the makeup trailer. You hit him so hard his ear turned red. He insulted my career, Isabella yelled, pointing a manicured nail at the designer. He said I overacted in La Pasión. He deserved it. Carmen waved her black rock aggressively toward the center of the room, her bracelets clinking loudly. The spirits are restless. I felt the violence. I felt it all the way from the gazebo. Mendoza slowly turned her head. She locked eyes with the 80s pop star. I never said he was found at the gazebo, Carmen, Mendoza said. The living room went dead silent. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the air conditioning. Carmen froze. The crystals. They guide me. They showed me the stones. Your crystals are going to need a defense attorney, Mendoza said flatly. Who else? She did it. Alejandro pointed at Carmen. She's been trying to put a hex on him since Tuesday. She put a voodoo doll under his bed. A hex doesn't leave physical evidence, you idiot, Carmen shrieked. Enough, Elena cut in. Everyone in this room hated Lorenzo. He was an arrogant, manipulative parasite. We all wanted him gone. But if you want a real motive, detective, you should talk to Renata. Mendoza tilted her head. Renata? Yesterday afternoon, Elena said smoothly, adjusting her cardigan. Lorenzo went into the production office. He screamed at Renata for 20 minutes. The walls in this villa are thin. He threatened to walk off the show and take half the cast with him if she didn't double his weekly rate and guarantee him a spot in the finale. He told me he had dirt on her, Isabella added, eagerly jumping on the new target to draw attention away from her own physical altercation. He said he knew something about the network permits. He laughed about it at the bar. Elena looked at Mendoza. Did you find the burner phone? Hector threw his hands up in the air. Phones are against the rules. We signed NDAs. We handed our devices to security on day 1. Elena rolled her eyes at the politician. Oh, grow up, Hector. Enzo smuggled a burner phone in his toiletry bag. He was taking pictures, recording conversations, and blackmailing half this room to secure his screen time. If you want to know who killed him, detective, find the phone. Mendoza didn't react. She closed her notepad and slid it into her back pocket. Chapter 8. So what do you think? Mendoza asked, stepping out of the villa. Alejandro was the only one telling the truth, Alex said, scanning the dark estate grounds. That explosive anger was completely genuine. He looked like he was about to throw a lamp at you, Reg noted. Exactly, Alex agreed. It is incredibly difficult to manufacture that level of rage on the spot. He felt cornered, but Elena is a problem. Mendoza frowned, stepping off the pavement and onto the damp grass. The journalist. She didn't flinch, Alex said. Even a hardened combat veteran or a trauma surgeon has an involuntary startle response when you drop the word murder in a quiet room. Elena clamped down too hard. It was a rehearsed blankness. She immediately redirected the interrogation, throwing Renata and the burner phone right in your lap, Reg added. You think she dropped a massive lead just to point us away from herself? Could be. Mendoza kept thinking out loud. What about Carmen? The kooky lady definitely knows something, Reg said flatly. She either followed Enzo out there and hit him, Alex said, or she was staring out her bedroom window and saw someone dragging a body and tried to cover her tracks with psychic crystals. I'll have uniforms check the sightlines from Carmen's bedroom window tomorrow, Mendoza said. I told Tito to lock them up for the night, or we'll end up with another victim. They approached the bright lights of the catering truck. The chaotic energy from earlier had completely vanished, replaced by an exhausted, jittery quiet. Under the main folding table, Bombay was passed out entirely on his back, his 4 paws sticking straight up in the air in a deep roast beef coma. Polly the parrot was perched on the back of a metal folding chair, his colorful head tucked completely under his wing, snoring with a faint rhythmic whistle. Gary, however, was practically vibrating. He was pacing back and forth in front of the espresso machine, holding a tiny paper cup. It's a massive conspiracy, Gary whispered fiercely, the second Mendoza stepped under the awning. A total cover-up. They're all lying. Here we go again, Reg said, rolling his eyes. Shannon was sitting at the table, surrounded by 3 empty coffee cups, her phone connected to a portable battery pack. She looked up, her eyes bloodshot from staring at a screen. Gary is actually right, she said, lifting her bloodshot eyes from the screen. You are not going to believe what I just found. Mendoza pulled out a chair. Tell me. Isabella and Enzo didn't meet at the show, Shannon said, leaning forward. Those two have a history. You found a connection? Alex asked, sitting down next to her. I didn't just find a connection, I found a financial hostage situation, Shannon said, tapping her phone screen. I went deep. I skipped the social media fluff and went straight into the archived Argentine telenovela fan forums from the late 90s. The hardcore fans keep everything. I found a scanned page from a 1998 issue of TV novelas. Shannon spun her phone around and slid it across the table. Mendoza looked at the screen. It was a grainy, digitally scanned magazine photo of a very young Isabella standing on a red carpet, smiling brightly. Standing just over her shoulder, half hidden in the background and looking incredibly smug, was a younger Lorenzo Costa. Enzo financed her breakout show, Shannon explained. According to the forum gossip, he was the silent backer, and he notoriously locked his breakout stars into terrible, ironclad contracts. Gossip isn't evidence, Shannon, Mendoza said. handing the phone back. No, but this is... Shannon swiped to the next tab. A fan account archived a deleted tweet Isabella posted 10 years ago. It was at 2 in the morning. She went on a massive rant about a, quote, leech stealing my syndication money in perpetuity. Mendoza crossed her arms. She's been the queen of daytime television for 30 years, and if Enzo has been taking a cut of every single rerun, that's a multi-million-dollar motive. And that explains the fake faint, Alex said, looking at Mendoza. She just needed a distraction so you wouldn't ask her direct questions. Good work, Shannon, Mendoza said. This is so exciting, Gary said, crushing his tiny espresso cup. Are you going to arrest her? Mateo is going to be heartbroken. Not yet, we don't have any evidence, Mendoza said, standing up. Elena said that Enzo had a burner phone. I want to see if Lucien can actually find it. Few minutes later, Mendoza pulled open the metal door to the editing bay. Lucien was slumped in the ergonomic chair, staring blankly at a wall of monitors. He had constructed a small pyramid out of empty energy drink cans on the edge of the console. Tell me you didn't give up, Mendoza said, walking into the freezing truck. I never give up. I just take moments of aggressive despair, Lucien said, spinning his chair around. The raw footage is gone, boss. Whoever ran the wipe macro was a professional. It's scrambled beyond recovery. So the killer is tech-savvy, Reg said, leaning against the doorframe. I don't think any of the contestants have a tech degree. This could have been anyone, Lucien said with a sigh. I casually asked the night shift editors how they run this place. Apparently, this specific union crew is very tight-knit. When they take a smoke break, they go as a pack. They leave this entire server rack completely unattended for 15 to 20 minutes at a time. Alex frowned. They leave the doors unlocked? Wide open, Lucien said, throwing his hands up. Literally anyone could have walked in, plugged a USB into the console, hit the overwrite macro, and walked back out before the crew finished their cigarettes. So, the video footage is officially a dead end, Mendoza said flatly. But Elena said Enzo smuggled a burner phone onto the set. Can you track it? If the production company confiscated everyone's phones on day one, Lucien said, typing rapidly, it shouldn't be that hard. Any unregistered cell signal pinging off the local estate tower is an anomaly. Let's see what we've got. Gary leaned over Lucien's shoulder. What are all those green dots? And the red ones? The red dots are the unregistered phone numbers, Lucien said, pointing at the screen. And there are 2 of them. He hit the enter key. 2 unregistered prepaid SIM cards, both local San Malvino area codes. 2 phones? Shannon asked. Who was the second one for? Look at the numbers. Lucien pulled up a data log next to the map. The phone numbers end in 44 and 45. They're sequential. Reg straightened up from the doorframe. They were bought at the exact same time, over the same counter. Enzo didn't just smuggle a phone for himself, Alex said, staring at the numbers. He bought a dedicated line to communicate with someone else. Where are the phones right now? Mendoza asked, stepping closer to the screen. Lucien hit another key. A digital timestamp appeared above the 2 red dots. They both pinged off the South Beach Tower at exactly 11:50 p.m. last night, Lucien said, tracing a finger over the map. They were together, then at exactly 12:12 a.m., they both vanished from the network entirely. The editing bay went quiet. The hum of the heavy servers suddenly felt very loud. I thought you could track phones even if they lose signal, Gary said. They didn't just lose signal, Lucien clarified, pointing to the blank logs at the bottom of the screen. The SIM cards were disconnected from the cellular architecture completely, meaning someone pulled the batteries, smashed them, or threw them directly into the ocean. Another digital roadblock, Mendoza said, her jaw tightening. Can you pull the operator data? Gary asked, pointing at the screen. Find out what convenience store sold them? Lucien let out a dry laugh, leaning back in his chair. Gary, getting purchase logs from a prepaid telecom carrier takes a federal court order and 3 weeks of bureaucracy. Even if I bypassed their encryption and hacked the local mainframe, we are talking days of parsing through thousands of lines of terrible billing history. So we have absolutely nothing, Shannon sighed. I didn't say that, Lucien said. I can't tell you what cash register sold them, but if you give me a few hours, I can isolate the initial tower handshakes. I can triangulate the exact GPS coordinates of where those two phones were first turned on. Not like we have any other options, Mendoza said with a sigh. Take your time. Chapter 9. Why are you standing at O'Malley's porch with a blowtorch at 7 o'clock in the morning? Mendoza asked Gary, stopping at the top of the porch steps. Gary was standing at the wicker table, wearing a floral apron over his neon pink shorts, actively aiming a flame at a large ceramic bowl. I'm bruleeing the oatmeal, Gary said over the roar of the torch. It adds a textural contrast. It smells like burning tires, Reg said from the screen door. But we had zero energy to cook for ourselves, so we waved the white flag. The garden gate banged open. Lucien shuffled onto the porch. He was wearing the exact same clothes from the night before, his curly hair stuck up in 3 different directions. He looked like a man who started a staring game with the digital abyss and lost. I hate cellular data, Lucien rasped, collapsing into the nearest empty chair. I hate radio frequencies. I hate towers. Did you triangulate the burner phones? Alex asked, sliding a mug of black coffee across the table. Lucien grabbed the mug with both hands like it was a lifesaver. It took me the entire night to parse the localized tower logs, but I found them, the 2 unregistered sequential numbers. Where did they activate? Mendoza asked, leaning against the railing. At the Golden Fig. Lucien took a long, scalding sip of coffee. 2 weeks ago. Shannon practically fell out of the hammock. 2 weeks ago? That was the night before the show officially started. Exactly, Lucien said. Enzo and the killer synced their phones before anyone even checked into the Castillo estate. All right, finish your coffee, Mendoza said, checking her watch. We're going downtown. Let's see what Julian knows. You can go wherever you want, Lucien said, setting the mug down and standing back up. I am going to lie face down on your living room rug and sleep until Monday. I'll leave the fan on for you, Alex smiled. The sound of confident, unhurried footsteps crunching on the gravel path drew their attention. Rafael Cardenas strolled up the driveway, looking entirely too rested for the early hour. Why are you back so early? Reg asked, eyeing him. I thought you had a 5 a.m. to catch another cheater. I already did, Rafa said, patting his camera. People do weird things on their morning run. Where did you get him? Gary asked, turning off the blowtorch. I caught him severely compromising his marriage against a lifeguard stand on the public beach. Rafa sighed, shaking his head. If you have free time this morning, Angie, I can give you the coordinates to cite them both for public indecency. They are still there. I have a dead producer and a migraine, Rafa, Mendoza said deadpan. Half the tourists on this island walk around half naked anyway. I'm not sending my uniforms to the beach. Suit yourself, Rafa smiled. What did I miss? Julian is Renata's alibi, and Enzo's burner phones originated at his restaurant, Shannon said, summarizing the chaos in one breath. Rafa raised an eyebrow. I'm confused, but if you're going to the Golden Fig right now, I'll come with you. 10 minutes later, the 4 of them walked through the mahogany doors of the Golden Fig. The restaurant was closed for the morning, but the interior was already buzzing with high-end culinary anxiety. Waitstaff in crisp white shirts were aggressively polishing wine glasses, and the smell of roasting garlic and fresh herbs drifted from the kitchen. Julian was standing near the hostess stand, meticulously adjusting the angle of a massive centerpiece of white orchids. He looked up as the bells on the door jingled. Friends and detective, Julian said, dropping a stray orchid petal into a bin. He looked at Mendoza and let out a long, dramatic sigh. Are you here to tell me my girlfriend's a killer? Please be gentle because that'll break my heart. So you admit it, Reg said, looking at Julian with a mischievous grin. Not a pairing I would have ever expected, but I'm happy for you, man. Julian crossed his arms, abandoning the flowers. I know Renata is the executive producer of a terrible, pastel-colored television show, and that's not my style, but she is brilliant and sharp, And funny, and I never thought something like this was in the cards for me." Alex smiled warmly at him. "We're happy for you, Julian. Really." "Thank you, Alex," Julian said, adjusting his lapel. "Renata's lawyer called me last night and told me Lorenzo Costa is dead. I can confirm she was with me the night before. I picked her up at midnight. We drank a bottle of Barolo in my apartment, and she left around 5:30 in the morning." "Thank you for confirming her alibi," Mendoza said, getting straight to the point. "But I'm not here about that. I'm here to talk about something that happened 2 weeks ago." "Let me think." Julian frowned. "The welcome dinner before they started shooting?" "Probably," Mendoza said. "We have digital evidence that someone activated 2 unregistered prepaid phones in or around this restaurant. Do you know anything about it?" "Renata rented out the entire main dining room," Julian explained, gesturing to the expansive empty tables. "It was the official kickoff dinner for the cast and the senior production team, about 30 people. It was an absolute circus. Those celebrities are too loud." "Was Enzo here?" Mendoza asked. "Of course he was," Julian said. "He spent 20 minutes complaining to my sommelier about the vintage of the champagne. But Angela, I couldn't possibly tell you if he passed a phone to anyone. The room was flooded with swag bags." Reg tilted his head. "What swag bags?" "Gift bags from the network sponsors," Julian said, rolling his eyes. They were massive canvas totes left on every single chair. They were filled with luxury sunscreen, expensive tequila, silk robes, and ridiculous Hollywood garbage. People were digging through them, trading items, throwing wrapping paper on my floor. It would have been incredibly easy for anyone to drop a tiny plastic phone into someone else's bag without anyone noticing. "Did your security cameras catch the dinner?" Mendoza asked, looking up at the black domes mounted in the corners of the ceiling. Julian shook his head apologetically. "Renata asked me to turn them off. The cast hadn't signed their final appearance releases yet, and she didn't want any unapproved footage of them drinking heavily leaking to the press. The system was completely dark from 7 p.m. to midnight." Mendoza sighed. "Another digital blind spot." "I am sorry, Angela," Julian said, "but I can ask my floor staff. I had 6 servers working the room that night. I will call them in for the lunch shift early. If Lorenzo spent a significant amount of time talking to one specific cast member, my servers will remember. They notice everything." "Thank you, Julian," Mendoza said. "That would be great." 2 minutes later, her phone rang. The caller ID flashed Dr. Elliot Crane. "Tell me you have a cause of death, Elliot," Mendoza said, putting it on speaker. "I have a cause of death, Angela," Elliot's tired voice echoed through the phone. "And you are not going to like it." "I rarely like anything you tell me," Mendoza said flatly. "Was it the head wound?" "The head wound was completely superficial," Elliot said, the sound of running water echoing in the background. "It wouldn't have killed a golden retriever. He either hit the gazebo table or someone smacked him with a rock post-mortem to make it look like a scuffle." "If the head wound didn't kill him, what did?" Rafa asked. "Talk's screen just came back from the rapid centrifuge," Elliot said. "I found massive, fatal levels of colchicine." "Colchicine?" Alex's eyes widened slightly. "It's used for the treatment of gout." "Exactly," Elliot confirmed. "And it has a massive latency period. It takes hours for the toxin to break down the cellular proteins and trigger organ failure." The restaurant went dead silent. Reg crossed his arms, staring at the phone. "How many hours, Elliot?" Mendoza asked, her voice dropping. "At least 3 to 4, Elliot sighed heavily. "Your Vic was a dead man walking long before he ever reached that beach." Chapter 10. Half an hour later, 3 men and 2 women in crisp, pressed white shirts and black slacks hurried through the front doors. Julian clapped his hands twice. "Tomas, put your apron on and come here immediately." A tall, impeccably groomed waiter with a sharp jawline froze halfway to the kitchen. He quickly dropped his bag behind the hostess stand and marched over to the corner table, looking nervously at the police detective, the private investigator, and the massive bearded man eating a brioche bun. Is there a problem with the inventory, Julian? Tomas asked carefully. No, Julian said. Detective Mendoza has a question about the television production opening dinner we hosted 2 weeks ago. Tomas's posture instantly stiffened. The reality show people, Tomas said, the words practically dripping with disdain. I remember them. They asked for ice in their Pinot Noir. Terrible crowd. I'm sorry you had to witness that, Alex said gently, pulling out the empty chair next to her. Tomas, do you remember a man named Lorenzo Costa? Tall, older, wore very expensive silk shirts? I remember him, Tomas said, his upper lip curling slightly. The guy in a Tom Ford suit with absolutely no spatial awareness. What does his spatial awareness have to do with anything? Mendoza asked. I was serving the primary champagne toast, Tomas explained, standing perfectly straight. I was balancing a silver tray carrying 8 flutes of 2012 Dom Perignon. It is a highly delicate operation. Center of gravity is crucial, Reg agreed between bites of his bun. Exactly, Thomas pointed at Reg, and this man, Lorenzo, slithered right behind a woman standing near the bar and leaned his entire upper body directly over my tray. Mendoza leaned forward. Who was the woman? The actress, Thomas said immediately, the one who always plays the crying widows on Channel 4. Isabella. What was Enzo doing leaning over your tray? Rafa asked, setting his espresso cup down. He was dropping a cheap phone into her bag, Tomas said, looking highly offended by the memory. He practically knocked over a $200 glass of champagne to do it. The table went completely silent. Mendoza caught Alex's eye. Did he say anything to her? Mendoza asked. He whispered right into her ear, Tomas said. He said, a little welcome gift, mi amor. And how did Isabella react? Alex asked, her voice calm and steady. Tomas frowned, the memory clearly standing out in his meticulous mind. She spun around. I thought she was going to yell at him, but she didn't. All the blood completely drained from her face. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. Did she say anything? Mendoza pressed. She whispered, What are you doing here? You aren't on the cast list. Thomas recounted perfectly. And Enzo? Reg asked. He just smiled this terrible, oily smile, Thomas said, shivering slightly in his crisp white shirt. He told her, I'm a surprise twist. We have so much to catch up on. Then he turned around, took a glass of champagne right off the center of my tray, and walked away. Ruining the balance, I assume, Reg said deadpan. It was a catastrophe, Thomas agreed heavily. Mendoza stood up. Thank you, Tomas. Thomas nodded sharply and practically sprinted toward the safety of the kitchen. Mendoza turned to Julian, who was staring at the doorway with wide eyes. Renata cast them both, Mendoza said flatly. Did she know they had a history? Did she put a predator and his victim in the same house on purpose for the ratings? No, Julian said instantly, shaking his head. Angela, I promise you, she didn't know. You have to understand how this works. How what works? Alex asked. Casting a show like this? Julian said, gesturing frantically with his hands. It is a logistical nightmare. Do you know how hard it is to find 12 aging celebrities scattered across Latin America who don't have conflicting endorsement deals, are still interesting enough for the viewers, and who are willing to be locked in a house without their publicists for a month? That sounds like a military recruitment tour, Reg said, finishing his bun. Only for narcissists. Exactly, Julian agreed. Renata wasn't doing deep-dive background checks into them. She was just frantically calling agents trying to fill the roster. Lorenzo Costa owned a massive production company. He probably just forced his way onto the network's roster at the last second, and Renata had no power to stop it. He's right, Rafa said quietly. A showrunner doesn't want that kind of drama on their set. It's a liability. Renata wouldn't have risked the insurance premiums. Which clears Renata completely, Alex said, nodding. She is just a very stressed television producer who covered up a body to save her job. Thank you, Julian said, letting out a massive breath of relief. I still have to arrest her for the freezer thing, Mendoza told Julian. I know she committed a crime. Julian winced. But I think I can live with that. The drive up the winding coastal road toward the Castillo estate was fast. The bright blue water of the Caribbean flashed between the gaps in the palm trees. We have the whole picture, Mendoza said over the wind rushing through the open windows of the cruiser. Enzo used his money to force his way onto the show. He ambushed Isabella at the welcome dinner and handed her the second burner phone. But why would he do that? Reg asked, keeping his eyes on the road. He already took all her money. Why torture her more? Some people are like that, Alex said with a sigh. Total control of other people's emotions is their drug of choice. Chapter 11. The Castillo estate looked significantly less glamorous in the harsh light of morning. The camera crews were still nowhere to be seen, and a heavy, anxious silence hung over the sprawling property. Mendoza walked straight through the front doors of the villa, followed closely by Alex and Reg. "Tito!" Mendoza called out. "Bring Isabella down to the library, just her." 3 minutes later, Isabella walked into the wood-paneled room. She had traded her silk sleep mask and pajamas for a flowing, emerald-green caftan and was doing her absolute best to project pure, unbothered television royalty. "Detective," Isabella sighed, draping herself elegantly over a leather armchair. "I hope this is brief. My skin is breaking out from the stress, and the craft services table is entirely out of alkaline water." Mendoza pulled a wooden chair from the desk and sat down directly across from the actress. She didn't bother with a warm-up. "Lorenzo didn't die from the head wound, Isabella," Mendoza said flatly. "He was poisoned. A lethal dose of colchicine." Isabella's perfectly manicured hand twitched. "Poison? How awful. I suppose you should be interrogating Alejandro then." "I'm not interested in the chef," Mendoza said, pulling her phone from her pocket. "I'm interested in the year 1998 and this article in TV Novelas magazine." She showed Isabella the grainy scan. Isabella froze for a second, then regained her composure. "That is all nonsense, detective, bad press. Enzo and I met in passing at my premiere, and a hungry reporter saw us standing together and decided to make some money." "Then why did you post this rant about Enzo on Twitter 10 years ago?" Mendoza scrolled on her phone. Isabella turned crimson. "I had a bit too much to drink that night. It's all nonsense. I deleted that post." "If you didn't know, whatever goes on the internet stays there forever," Mendoza said with a sad smile. "And you have loyal fans who save everything you post." Isabella crossed her arms over her chest and stared out the window without saying a word. "We know he financed your breakout role," Alex said gently, stepping forward. "We know he owned your syndication rights, and we know he whispered to you at the dinner, 'A little welcome gift, mi amor,' and gave you a burner phone. We can trace the cellular pings, Isabella. We know you went to the beach to meet him the night he died." Isabella stared at them. For a long, agonizing moment, the room was completely silent. Then her shoulders slumped. The dramatic posture vanished, leaving behind a very tired, very terrified woman. "He took everything from me," Isabella whispered, her voice trembling. The theatrical flair was completely gone. "When I was 22, I signed a contract I didn't understand. He took 60% of my royalties for 3 decades. I finally got out from under him last year, spent a fortune on lawyers and bought my freedom." "But then he showed up here," Alex said. "He forced his way onto the cast." Isabella wiped a stray tear from her cheek, completely ignoring her makeup. "He told me that if I didn't sign a new contract giving him a cut of my current endorsement deals, he was going to leak fabricated stories to the tabloids. He was going to say I bribed executives, bribed the judge that ruled in my favor. I could go to prison for that, do you understand? He was going to destroy my legacy." "And you thought you wouldn't go to prison for poisoning him?" Reg asked deadpan. "No!" Isabella snapped, her head jerking up. "I hated him, but I didn't kill him. He texted me on that stupid phone at 11:40, told me to meet him down by the beach to sign the paperwork." Mendoza leaned forward. "Did you go?" "Yes," Isabella said, wrapping her arms around herself. "But when I got down there, he was already on the ground gasping for air. I thought he was having a heart attack." Did you at least try to help him? Mendoza asked. Isabella looked down at her hands. I froze. All my problems were disappearing right in front of my eyes. If I helped him, he wouldn't be grateful. He'd just keep tormenting me. I watched him stop breathing. What happened next? I panicked. I realized that if the police found him dead and they found the burner phone in his pocket with all the texts, my career would be over anyway. So I tried to hide him. I grabbed him by the arms and tried to drag him toward the rocks. She let out a bitter, exhausted laugh, rubbing her right arm. But he was dead weight. I slipped on the wet stones, fell hard, and tore my arm open. Alex nodded slowly, finally getting an explanation for the angry red scratch she'd seen during Isabella's fake faint. When I realized I couldn't move him, Isabella continued, a sob finally breaking free, I just searched his body, found the phone, and threw it into the ocean with the one he gave me. I also yanked his microphone pack off because I was terrified it was recording the whole thing. I threw that in the water, too, but I didn't kill him. I swear to God, when I found him, he was already dying. Mendoza stared at her, then at Alex, who gave a small nod. We believe you, Mendoza said softly. When did you last see Enzo alive and well? During the cocktail party, Isabella whispered, staring blankly at the floor. I was having a conversation with another contestant by the fire pit when he just came over and said that my days as a TV star are numbered, that no production will ever touch me, and my own children won't speak to me. I completely broke down. Mendoza's eyes narrowed. Who were you talking to by the fire pit, Isabella? Isabella looked up, her eyes widening as the realization hit her. Matteo, he's such a good man. I wish I had met him earlier, so supportive. I was so upset. I told him everything. I told him what Enzo was doing to me. Reg suddenly stiffened. He looked at Mendoza. Colchicine. What about it? Mendoza asked. Colchicine isn't just a random poison, Alex said, realizing where Reg was heading. It's a highly specific medication for gout. Gout is a form of inflammatory arthritis. It heavily affects older athletes who have suffered massive, repetitive joint trauma. The room went completely still. Mendoza slowly stood up from her chair. Older athletes, like a retired soccer player with 2 blown ACLs. Chapter 12. Well, Reg said, letting out a long, low whistle, at least now we know who our killer is. Poor woman. I know that Lorenzo is our victim and he deserves justice, Alex murmured, looking back at the door. But at least now she's free. I second that, Reg said, nodding. But if Isabella didn't move the body to the gazebo, who did? Before Mendoza could answer, her phone rang. She pulled it out, saw Lucien's name on the screen, and hit the green button. I thought you were planning to sleep till Monday on Alex's carpet, Mendoza said with a smile. Yeah, that didn't work so well. Bombay kept licking my face. Lucien's voice crackled through the speaker. But I got some good news. I'm listening, Mendoza said. I figured out who wiped the video servers, Lucien said, with a note of triumph in his exhausted voice. It bothered me all night. The overwrite macro used to scramble the raw footage was incredibly sophisticated, too sophisticated for a reality TV editor, and definitely too sophisticated for a bunch of aging celebrities, so I stopped looking at the local network and started looking at the external firewalls. Mendoza straightened up. Someone accessed it remotely? Exactly, Lucien said. The command didn't come from inside the editing bay. It came from the estate's guest Wi-Fi. I traced the IP address back to a specific MAC address on a personal laptop. It belongs to Davis, the network's lead legal counsel. Mendoza let out a dry, humorless laugh. The lawyer. Who else? The second Renata called him in a panic and said there was a dead contestant on the property. He logged into the production server and nuked the last 24 hours of footage so the police couldn't legally subpoena unedited video of Lorenzo getting drunk and fighting with the cast. It was a pure, panicked corporate cover-up. Lucien, you are a genius, Mendoza said, a genuine smile finally breaking across her face. I accept cash and premium coffee beans, Lucien said. I'm going home to sleep in my bed now. Do not call me unless the island is literally sinking." The line went dead. Mendoza put the phone back into her pocket and looked over at Tito, who was standing guard by the glass staircase. "Tito," Mendoza called out, her voice echoing in the empty hall, "go to the production office. You will find a man in a very expensive Navy suit named Davis. Arrest him for destruction of evidence and obstruction of justice." Tito blinked. "The lawyer, boss?" "The lawyer," Mendoza confirmed. "Read him his rights, put him in the back of your cruiser, and take him to processing. Make sure he gets the holding cell with the drafty window." "What about Renata, boss?" "Just keep her locked in the office. I'll arrest her myself." "Yes, boss!" Tito practically beamed, jogging away down the corridor. Mendoza turned back to Alex and Reg. "All right, we have the motive, we have the poison, and we have the timeline. Now we just need the man with the bad knees." "He should still be locked in his bedroom if Tito didn't let him roam free," Reg said, pushing off the wall. Matteo was sitting at a small wrought-iron patio table on his balcony. He had traded his boxers for a crisp, light blue linen shirt and tailored slacks. He looked entirely peaceful, sipping from a small porcelain cup of black coffee. Resting on the floor right beside his chair was a packed dark leather duffel bag. "Good morning, Detective," Matteo said quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I suppose you spoke to Isabella." "We did," Mendoza said, keeping her voice even. "She told us everything Lorenzo was doing to her. She told us about the contract, the blackmail, and the burner phone. And she told us she confided in you by the fire pit at the cocktail party." Matteo smiled. It was a sad, gentle expression that completely softened the harsh, weathered lines of his face. He gently set his coffee cup down on the saucer. "She is a wonderful woman," Matteo said, his voice full of quiet reverence. "She has spent her entire life surviving in an industry designed to chew people up and spit them out. She has fought so hard for everything she has. She didn't deserve to have that parasite drain the life out of her anymore." "How are your knees, Matteo?" Alex asked softly, looking at the former athlete. Matteo chuckled, a dry, self-deprecating laugh, and reached down to massage his right leg. "Terrible. The cartilage has been completely gone for a decade. I have severe arthritis and awful flare-ups of gout. I take a very strong prescription of colchicine to manage the swelling. I have to carry the pills with me everywhere." "And you put that prescription in Lorenzo's drink," Mendoza said. "It was remarkably easy," Matteo admitted, turning his coffee cup by the handle, tracing the porcelain rim with his thumb. Lorenzo was a creature of habit. He always drank the same 20-year single malt, and he always left his glass on the bar top when he wanted to start an argument. When Alejandro threw his rehearsed tantrum, Lorenzo turned around to mock the chef. Every single camera, every single producer, and every single contestant looked at Alejandro. "And you took the opportunity?" Reg nodded. "I simply pretended I was looking for something behind the counter," Matteo said, looking up at Reg. The alcohol dissolved the powder from the capsules instantly. Lorenzo turned back around, took his glass, and drank it in one swallow. He never even tasted it. "Did you know it wouldn't kill him right away?" Alex asked. "I've been taking colchicine for 8 years now. I did my research," Matteo nodded. "I knew it had a massive latency period. I assumed he would go to bed and simply pass away in his sleep. I thought the coroner would look at his lifestyle, look at how much he drank, and assume his heart finally gave out. It was supposed to be quiet." "But that didn't go according to plan," Mendoza said, crossing her arms. "He texted Isabella and went down to the beach to blackmail her one last time." Matteo's jaw tightened. The peaceful expression vanished, replaced by a flash of protective anger. "When Isabella suddenly decided to leave at midnight, I waited a bit and followed her. I knew Lorenzo was up to something and I didn't want to let her be alone with him. I stayed back, hiding in the shadows near the cliffside stairs. I saw her walk down to the beach, but Lorenzo was already collapsing. The poison had finally worked." "Did she see you?" Mendoza asked. "No," Matteo shook his head. "She was entirely focused on him. I watched her panic. I saw her grab him by the arms to try and drag him into the rocks to hide him. She slipped on the wet stones, fell hard, and tore her arm open. It broke my heart to see her crying like that. "So you went down there to finish the job?" Reg asked. "I went down there to protect her," Matteo said fiercely. "I didn't want the police to think it was her. His death had to look natural." "So, you dragged a dead man all the way up the cliff stairs and into the gazebo," Mendoza said, piecing the final puzzle together. "If I hadn't dropped him while trying to sit him upright by the stone table and given him that nasty cut," Matteo said, closing his eyes for a brief moment, "everyone would think he just passed out drunk and died." "That's plausible," Mendoza nodded. "If not for that wound, Renata would have probably called an ambulance instead of hiding him in the freezer for the sake of the show." Matteo frowned, a look of profound, bewildered disgust crossing his face. "A freezer? Is that really where he was? When Renata locked us in our rooms, I assumed she called the police. The freezer? That is crazy. These television people are completely insane." "Not as crazy as killing a man?" Mendoza gave him a look. "I protected the woman I love, Detective," Matteo said, looking Mendoza directly in the eyes. "Lorenzo Costa was a monster. I have no regrets. I would do it again." Chapter 13. "It's officially the biggest media scandal in Latin American history," Shannon said, staring at her phone screen in awe. She was sitting sideways in the porch hammock, a half-empty glass of sangria dangling from her fingertips. The network tried to issue a sanitized press release about Lorenzo suffering a sudden medical event, but someone on the production crew leaked the truth to TMZ. The internet is absolutely losing its mind. "I still can't believe they canceled it." Lucien shook his head. "I watched 15 hours of completely manufactured drama, and I don't even get to see who gets the final rose. I feel robbed." "A man died, Lucien," Alex said gently from the wicker chair. I know, Lucien sighed. "But viewers need closure." "The only closure we're gonna get is in the San Malvino courthouse," Rafa said, swirling the ice in his rum. "Though I have to admit, Matteo's confession is every defense attorney's nightmare. You can't negotiate a plea deal with a man who is actively bragging about the murder to anyone who will listen." "He's not bragging," Alex said. "He just wants to be perfectly sure that no prosecutor ever looks in Isabella's direction. It's a complete, deliberate sacrifice." "Which is exactly why the telenovela fan forums are currently treating him like a modern-day saint," Shannon pointed out, swiping through her tabs. "They're already starting a legal defense fund for him. And Isabella released a statement this morning. She announced she's officially retiring from television and moving to a quiet coastal town in Portugal." "She finally got her freedom." Reg smiled faintly. The sound of tires crunching on gravel interrupted the conversation. Mendoza's police cruiser parked by the garden gate. Mendoza climbed out, looking like she had spent the last 48 hours drowning in a sea of paperwork, and slowly walked up the porch steps. Reg didn't say a word. He just reached into the cooler, pulled out a dripping bottle of local beer, twisted the cap off with a sharp flick of his wrist, and nudged it across the table. Mendoza sank into the nearest empty chair and took the beer. "Thank you." "How is Legoland?" Reg asked, leaning back against the railing. "Crowded, as always," Mendoza said, taking a long sip. "Matteo signed a full, legally binding confession. He didn't even ask for a lawyer, just for an extra pillow for his knees." "And the corporate attack dog?" Lucien asked, opening one eye. "Tell me Davis is suffering." Mendoza smirked. Davis tried to invoke diplomatic immunity, international trade law, and his own country club membership. He threw an absolute fit. Tito put him in the holding cell right next to a guy who was arrested for public intoxication and hasn't stopped singing sea shanties since Saturday. I told Davis the court has a massive backlog, so he'll need to wait for some time for his arraignment. It's beautiful. "I didn't know you can be that evil," Rafa chuckled. "What about Renata?" Shannon asked, leaning forward. "Is she going to prison for freezing the body?" "If it was up to Elliot, she most definitely would," Mendoza said, smiling. "But she made bail this afternoon. The judge took her passport, heavily fined the network, and charged her with tampering with a corpse. But because she's a non-violent flight risk, he granted her house arrest pending trial. "I bet Julian is ecstatic," Alex said. "He was practically vibrating," Mendoza laughed. "He is already remodeling his guest bedroom into a production office for her, and he told everyone he's designing a specialized frozen dessert menu." "That's one way to draw inspiration," Rafa chuckled. "It's a match made in heaven," Reg grunted. "Two insufferable perfectionists locked in an apartment together. They'll either get married or burn the restaurant down by Christmas." "Or both," Shannon grinned. Gary, who had been uncharacteristically quiet at the end of the table, suddenly stood up. He smoothed down his bright green t-shirt, cleared his throat, and looked around the porch with an expression of profound, unbearable smugness. "I just want to state for the official record," Gary said loudly, pointing a finger at all of them, "that when we were watching that jet ski date, I looked all of you in the eyes and told you that Mateo was a true romantic." Reg groaned, dragging a hand down his face. "Here we go." "You all called him an idiot." Gary pointed an accusing finger at Reg. "You said he was faking it. You said his tears were from coastal chop and blown ACLs. The man committed first-degree murder just to defend his lady's honor. I was right. And you all are jaded and can't see true love even if it stares right at you." "True love!" Polly shrieked from the rafters, flapping his bright green wings excitedly. "True love! Bad knees!" Under the table, Bombay let out a deep, rumbling sigh, thumping his massive tail once against the floorboards in agreement. Mendoza rolled her eyes, but a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Maybe you're right. We do have a bit of professional deformation." "Thank you, Angela," Gary beamed, sitting back down. "We have to work on that. I'll help you. I still have a massive list of romantic comedies saved from Valentine's. I suggest we watch one every night for a month to fix you." Reg picked up his phone and started scrolling aggressively. "Lucien, come over here. How do I sell our TV?" This has been Death by Reality Check, a hilarious feel-good cozy mystery, Book 31 in the Island Whodunit series, written by Tess Marlowe.
Thank you so much for listening to the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next mystery. See you on San Malvino.